After 7 years of freeloading in my house, my daughter and son-in-law unexpectedly won $100 million in the lottery. That very evening, he walked into the kitchen in an expensive suit, looked me straight in the eye, and ordered, "Pack your bags. The nursing home is your place from Monday onwards." I wasn't angry. I just quietly sipped my black coffee and smiled. "Son, before you kick me out, did you check whose name was actually on that ticket?" His face froze. "Welcome to this story. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Quick reminder, this narrative includes dramatized elements for storytelling and educational value. Any resemblance to actual persons or situations is purely coincidental, but the lesson behind it is what truly matters. After 7 years of living in my house, my daughter and her husband won $100 million in the lottery. On a ticket I bought them. 8 days later, my son-in-law walked into my kitchen wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly pension. He was broad-shouldered, square-jawed, 34 years old, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from believing other people exist to get out of your way. His name was Garrett Webb, and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "We do not need your charity anymore. Pack what you need." I set my coffee down on the counter. Black coffee. I have been drinking it black since 1974, and I was not about to change the recipe for a man who had been sleeping under my roof for 7 years without paying a dime of rent. I looked at Garrett Webb across my kitchen, the kitchen I had built with my own hands in 1989, and I smiled. "Son," I said, "did you check whose name is on that ticket?" His face changed. Not all at once. It was like watching a crack spread across concrete, slow and irreversible. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But nothing came out. But I am getting ahead of myself. You do not know me yet. Let me fix that. My name is Virgil Prescott. I am 72 years old. For 38 years, I worked as a civil hydraulic engineer for the Montana Department of Natural Resources, designing water treatment systems and dam spillways for communities across the western half of the state. I retired in 2014 with a pension of $1,900 a month, a certificate of appreciation signed by the governor, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when people in 6 different counties turned on their faucets, clean water came out because of calculations I had done by hand in an office with no air conditioning. I am not a rich man. I have never been a rich man. But I am a precise one. 40 years of engineering will do that to a person. You learn to measure twice, document everything, and never trust a structure you have not inspected yourself. I live at 247 Pinewood Drive, Riverside Springs, Montana. 10 acres of flat meadow backed up against a tree line with the Absaroka Range sitting on the horizon like a painting someone hung there and forgot to take down. I bought the land in 1986 for $22,000. Catherine and I built the house ourselves over 3 summers, weekends, and holidays, with help from Frank Ballard next door and a local contractor who owed me a favor from a drainage project. Have you ever stood on a piece of land and felt it in your bones? Not just that you owned it, but that it owned you right back. That is what Pinewood Drive felt like. Every nail I drove into that frame, every beam I measured and cut and sanded, every evening I spent on my knees laying tile while Catherine handed me spacers and told me stories about her students. She was a high school English teacher. She could recite Frost and Whitman from memory while grouting a bathroom floor, and she did regularly whether I asked her to or not. Catherine, my Catherine. She planted a Douglas fir tree in our front yard the spring we moved in, 1989. A sapling no taller than her waist. She said every home needed something that would outlive its owners. That tree is 35 feet tall now. It shades the entire front porch in the summer and holds snow on its branches in winter like a woman holding up her skirt to cross a puddle. I can see it from every window on the east side of the house. I have had my morning coffee looking at that tree for 35 years, and I have never once gotten tired of it. The porch. I built that porch in 1991, the summer Colleen turned 4. Cedar planks hand-railed wide enough for 2 rocking chairs and a side table. Catherine and I sat on that porch every evening from May to September. We drank cider on New Year's Eve in the kitchen and watched the sun set from the porch in summer. And never once in 30 years did I imagine a day when someone would try to take it from me. The house is 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with a window over the sink that looks out at the mountains. Catherine's walnut desk sits in the bedroom, the same desk where she graded papers for 26 years. The deed is in my name. Always has been. I paid the mortgage off in 2003, 11 years ahead of schedule, because I am an engineer, and I do not like debt the same way I do not like loose bolts. Both will fail you eventually. $1,900 a month. That is what I live on. That is what I have lived on since 2014. I buy my groceries at the Riverside General Store. I maintain my own property. I change my own oil, and I have not asked anyone for anything since Catherine died. I do not say that with pride, or maybe I do. A man is allowed a little pride when he has kept his house standing for 35 years with his own 2 hands. I did not know it then, but I was describing a life that was about to be dismantled. Piece by piece, by people I loved. That is the house I am about to tell you the story of. The house I almost lost. The house I fought to keep. The house where my dead wife planted a tree that would outlive us both, and where my son-in-law stood in my kitchen and told me to leave. Let me go back to the beginning. To the winter, everything changed. Catherine died on a Tuesday in January 2017. A patch of black ice on Route 12. A cattle truck that could not stop in time. And 32 years of marriage ended in the space it takes to draw a single breath. The highway patrol officer who came to my door was younger than my daughter. He held his hat in both hands, and he could not look me in the eye, and I knew before he opened his mouth. You always know. The body understands before the mind does. She was 66 years old. She had worked as a pediatric occupational therapist at the Riverside Springs Community Health Center for 32 years, helping children learn to hold pencils and tie shoes and button coats. She was the kind of woman who remembered every child's name, every parent's worry, every small victory that no one else noticed. She drove Route 12 every morning at 7:15 and every evening at 5:40, and she had driven it without incident for over a decade. It took one patch of ice, one truck, one Tuesday. The house did not change after she died. That was the cruelest part. The walls stayed where they were. The kitchen window still looked out at the mountains. The Douglas fir still held its branches against the winter sky. But the silence. I want you to understand something about grief that no one tells you. It does not empty a house. It fills it. It fills it with a silence so thick you can hear the walls settling the clock, ticking in a room you are not standing in, the floorboards creaking under the weight of no one at all. Her reading glasses sat on the walnut desk in our bedroom for 3 weeks before I could bring myself to move them. I did not move them far. I put them in the top drawer next to her bookmark and a pen that still had the cap chewed the way she always chewed them. I closed the drawer, and I did not open it again for 6 months. The bed was the hardest. Not sleeping in it. Sleeping in half of it. My side stayed warm. Her side was cold every morning, and every morning I reached across and felt the cool sheet and remembered all over again that she was gone. A man can know something with his mind and still have to relearn it with his hand every single day. Her photograph sat on the mantle, the one from our 30th anniversary. She was holding my hand and squinting into the sun, and there was a look on her face that I have never been able to describe to anyone. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a woman who had decided 30 years earlier that she was exactly where she wanted to be and had never revised that opinion. I talked to that photograph more than I care to admit. An engineer sees the world in load-bearing structures. Every system has a piece that holds the rest together, a beam or a joint or a foundation element, that if you remove it does not cause an immediate collapse. The building stands. It looks fine, but the load has shifted, and the stress is now falling on parts that were never designed to carry it. Catherine was my load-bearing beam. When she was gone, the house still stood. I still stood, but I could feel the stress in places I had never noticed before. The mornings, the evenings, the long stretch between 4 o'clock and dark, when there was no one to talk to and nothing to do but listen to the quiet and wonder if this was what the rest of my life would sound like. But I managed. I want to be clear about that. I was not helpless. I was 70 years old. I had 2 working hands, a sharp mind, and a pension that covered my needs. I kept the house clean. I maintained the property. I repaired the porch railing in March when a windstorm cracked 2 of the balusters. I planted Catherine's garden in April, the way she would have planted it, with tomatoes along the south fence and marigolds bordering the walkway, because she believed marigolds kept the deer out, and I was not about to argue with a dead woman I still loved. Frank Ballard, my neighbor to the east, checked on me every few days. We sat on the porch and drank coffee and talked about water tables and fence posts and the price of diesel. Frank never asked me how I was feeling. He knew better. He just showed up, which is what good men do. 3 months. That is how long I had my house to myself before I gave it away. Willingly, lovingly, foolishly. I had my pension. I had my garden. I had Frank next door and enough sense to know that being alone is not the same as being helpless. I cooked my own meals, changed my own oil, filed my own taxes, and fell asleep every night in a house I had built, with my own 2 hands in a bed that was half empty, but still mine. Then my daughter called. "Dad," she said. Her voice was thin. The kind of thin that a voice gets when the person on the other end has been crying for hours and is trying to pretend they have not. "Dad, we are in trouble." And I did what every father does. I said, "Come home." Colleen called on a Wednesday evening in April 2017, 3 months after Catherine's funeral. Her voice had that particular thinness, the kind that tells you a person has been crying before they picked up the phone. "Dad," she said, "we are in trouble." She told me Garrett's roofing business had gone under. 2 lawsuits from clients claiming faulty work. Debts she would not put a number on, which told me the number was bad. They had an eviction notice taped to their apartment door in Missoula. She was crying by the time she finished, and I could hear something else in the background. Silence. The particular silence of a man sitting in the same room, listening, saying nothing. Letting his wife make the call. I did not ask about the lawsuits. I did not ask about the debts. I did not ask why a man with a commercial contractor's license could not find work in a state where every other person is building a garage or a barn or a second story. I did not ask a single question. I just said, "Come stay with me. This house is too big for one person anyway." That is what fathers do. And that is exactly what people who want something from you count on. They arrived on a Saturday. I had spent 2 days preparing. I aired out the guest room, put fresh sheets on the bed, stocked the refrigerator with more food than I had bought in 3 months. I even brewed a pot of coffee and set out 3 mugs on the counter. And for a moment, standing in that kitchen with 3 mugs instead of 1, I almost felt like the house was breathing again. Colleen stepped out of the passenger side first. My daughter. Colleen Prescott, 38 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her mother's way of tilting her head when she listened. She had been a licensed veterinary technician before Garrett convinced her she did not need to work anymore. She hugged me in the driveway, and it was the kind of hug you give when you have run out of every other option. Tight. Desperate. Her face pressed into my shoulder like she was trying to disappear. I held her. I smelled the spring mud and the pine and the thawing earth all around us, and I held my daughter, and I thought, this is right. This is what the house is for. Then Garrett got out of the truck. Garrett Webb was 41 years old, broad-shouldered and square-jawed, a former commercial roofing contractor whose business had collapsed under the weight of 2 lawsuits and a reputation for cutting corners, though he told Colleen it was the economy. He stepped onto my gravel driveway, and he did not look at me. He did not look at the house. He looked at the land. His eyes moved slowly from the tree line to the south fence to the mountains on the horizon, the way a man looks at something he is measuring, not admiring. Measuring. His first words to me were not "thank you." They were not "this is kind of you." His first words, standing on my property next to my daughter in front of the house I had built with my own hands, were these: "Nice spread you have got here." "How many acres?" "10," I said. He nodded. Slow, like he was filing it away. I should have heard what he was really asking. I did not. I heard a man making conversation because that is what I wanted to hear. A father's love is a kind of deafness. You hear what you need to hear to keep believing the best about the people your children have chosen. He shook my hand. Firm grip. Held it a beat too long, the way men do when they want you to know they are strong. "Just a few months, sir," he said, "until we get back on our feet." I showed them inside. Colleen touched the kitchen counter and her eyes filled. She looked at the hook on the wall where Catherine used to hang her coat, and she said, "I miss her dad." "I know," I said. "I do too." Garrett carried 2 suitcases upstairs without asking which room. He picked the one at the end of the hall, the largest guest room, the one with the window that overlooked the full 10 acres. I noticed that. I told myself it did not mean anything. That first dinner I cooked for 3. Pot roast, the way Catherine used to make it, with carrots and red potatoes and rosemary from the garden. Colleen ate slowly, smiling for the first time in what looked like months. Garrett ate fast, the way a man eats when he is already thinking about something else. He complimented the food without looking up from his plate. "Nice place you have here," he said again. "Real nice. 2 compliments about the property in one afternoon. 0 about the meal. 0 about the generosity." I counted because that is what engineers do. We count things. We measure. And when the measurements do not add up, we are supposed to ask why. I did not ask why. I cleared the dishes, and I brewed more coffee, and I told myself that my daughter was home, and that was all that mattered. 7 years. That is how long a few months turned out to be. 7 years of Garrett Webb in my house, eating my food, sleeping under my roof, and slowly, so slowly, I almost did not notice, rearranging the pieces of my life until I could barely recognize the picture. That was my first mistake, not loving my daughter. That was never a mistake. The mistake was not asking more questions about the man she married. The mistake was hearing "nice spread" and thinking it was a compliment, when what it really was, I would learn, was an appraisal. The appraisal began slowly. That is the thing about a man like Garrett Webb. He does not walk into your house and rearrange it overnight. He moves one chair. He waits a week. He moves another. And by the time you notice you are sitting in a room you built with your own hands, wondering when it stopped feeling like yours. The first 2 years I convinced myself this arrangement could work. Garrett helped with the yard. He mowed in the summer, cleared snow in the winter, fixed a gutter that had been sagging since the previous fall. Colleen cooked on Sundays pot roast or chicken casserole, and the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table and ate together like a family. I told myself the house needed this. I told myself I needed this, and maybe I did. But I had been an engineer for 38 years, and engineers are trained to see where the stress fractures are, even when everyone else is still admiring the paint. The furniture moved first. Small things. The armchair by the window shifted 2 feet to the left. The bookshelf in the living room rotated to face a different wall. The rug in the hallway disappeared one afternoon and was replaced with a runner I had never seen before. Each change was small enough to seem accidental, helpful even. He is just making himself at home, I thought. That is what you want when family moves in. You want them to feel comfortable. Then he moved Catherine's photograph. It sat on the mantel where it had sat since 1997. The 30th anniversary picture. Catherine holding my hand, squinting into the sun. Garrett moved it to the hallway shelf behind a stack of magazines. I moved it back. He moved it again 2 months later, this time to the guest room closet shelf. Better light in here, he said. I moved it back. The third time I found it face down in a kitchen drawer. I took a photograph of where he put it each time. Then I took a photograph of where it belonged. Old habit. Engineers document everything. I did not know yet that those photographs would become evidence. It is just furniture, Dad, Colleen said when I mentioned the rearranging. She said it gently, the way you speak to someone you think is being difficult. And maybe I was. Maybe a photograph on a mantle is a small thing. But it was not a small thing to me. It was the last place Catherine looked out from every morning when I drank my coffee, and a man who could not even remember to say thank you was putting her face in a drawer. Have you ever watched someone dismantle your life so slowly that each individual piece seems too small to fight over? That is the genius of it. No single thing Garrett did was worth a confrontation, but together they were a siege. A chair here, a photograph there, a rug replaced a shelf rearranged. Each one a brick removed from a wall so gradually that by the time you feel the draft, half the structure is gone. Then came the property taxes. End of the first year, November 2017. Garrett sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Let me handle the property taxes this year. Least I can do." His voice was casual, easy, the voice of a man offering to wash the dishes. I should have said no. I should have said that I had paid my own property taxes for 31 years, and I did not intend to stop. Instead, I said, "That is kind of you." And he smiled. And he paid them. In his own name. He did it again the second year. Same casual tone, same easy smile, same result. Garrett Webb listed as the taxpayer on the property records for 247 Pinewood Drive, Riverside Springs, Montana. 2 consecutive years. I kept the receipts. I did not know why. Call it instinct. Call it 38 years of never signing off on a structure without checking the foundation first. That autumn, Frank Ballard came by for coffee. Frank lived on the 5 acres directly east of mine, a 75-year-old retired Army Corps of Engineers surveyor and Vietnam veteran who raised chickens, drove a truck older than most of his neighbors, and had zero patience for what he called people who smile while they are measuring your coffin. Frank and I had been friends for over 20 years. He was the man who had helped me build this house. He knew every beam in it. Frank sat on my porch and looked through the kitchen window at Garrett's new arrangement of the living room and said nothing for a long time. Then he set down his coffee and asked me a question that changed everything. "Virgil, who has been paying your property taxes," I told him. His face hardened. Not anger. Something worse. Recognition. "Montana law," Frank said. 5 years of continuous property tax payment combined with open and notorious possession of the property can establish an adverse possession claim. He looked at me. "He is building a case, Virgil. He is building a legal claim to your house, one tax payment at a time." I stared at him. I could feel my hand tighten around the porch, railing, the same railing I had sanded and sealed the summer Catherine was pregnant with Colleen. "You think he is doing this on purpose," I said. Frank looked at me the way only a man who has known you for 20 years can. "I think a man who asks how many acres before he says hello does not do anything by accident. 2 years of property taxes. 2 of 5. I lay in bed that night and did the math the way I had calculated load tolerances for 38 years. Precise. Cold. Terrifying. 3 more years, and Garrett Webb would have a legal foundation to claim my home. The house I built. The house Catherine died belonging to. The house where her photograph kept ending up face down in a drawer. I did not sleep well that night. I did not sleep well for a long time after. The sleepless nights became a habit. I would lie in bed counting years, the way I used to count load tolerances, and the math never came out in my favor. But morning always arrived, and with it the sound of Garrett moving through my house like a man who had already decided it was his. Year 3. That is when he stopped pretending to be polite. He did not announce it. There was no confrontation, no line drawn in the kitchen. He simply stopped performing the version of himself that had made the first 2 years bearable. The helpful son-in-law who mowed the lawn and fixed the gutter vanished overnight, and in his place was the man who had been there all along. He took over the living room, not by asking, not by discussing it, but by filling it. His laptop on the coffee table, his papers on the couch, his jacket on the back of Catherine's chair. He stood in the doorway one evening while I was watching the news and said, "I need this room for a call." Not a question, a statement. I got up and went to my bedroom because it was easier than arguing, and I told myself it was just one evening. It was not just one evening. He stopped knocking before entering my bedroom. He would open the door at 7 in the morning and say something about the hot water or the thermostat or the garbage schedule, and I would be sitting on the edge of my bed in my undershirt, and he would not apologize. He would not even pause. He spoke to me the way you speak to a piece of furniture that is in the way. There is a term in engineering called creep. It is what happens when a material under constant stress slowly deforms over time. Not suddenly, not visibly. Just a millimeter here, a fraction there, a gradual bending under pressure that you cannot see until the structure fails. That is what Garrett did to my life. Creep. He deformed the shape of my days so slowly that I did not notice the house was no longer mine until I was asking permission to use my own kitchen in the morning. "You left the stove on again, Virgil," he said one Tuesday. His voice was slow, over-enunciated. The voice people use when they are talking to someone they believe is losing their mind. I had not left the stove on. I had not used the stove that day. But Colleen was standing in the hallway, and she heard him say it, and she looked at me with something that might have been pity, and I understood then what he was doing. He was not just taking my house. He was building a story. The story of an old man who could not take care of himself. He paid the property taxes again. Year 3, year 4. Each time with the same casual offer, the same easy smile. Each time in his own name. I kept the receipts. I kept every receipt, and Frank kept counting. 4 years. Virgil Frank said one afternoon on the porch, his voice tight in a way I had never heard from a man who had survived Vietnam without raising his voice. He has paid 4 years. 1 more year and he can file. You understand what I am telling you. I understood. I understood precisely. And I did nothing, because my daughter was in that house. And every time I thought about confronting Garrett, I saw Colleen's face, and I could not bring myself to be the reason she lost another home. I need to tell you about one evening in particular. Autumn 2020. Because what happened on that porch is something I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times since, and every time I hear what my daughter was actually saying. But that night, I heard nothing. It was October. The Douglas fir was holding the last of the evening light in its branches, the way it always does when the season turns. Colleen came out and sat beside me. She did not bring coffee. She did not bring a blanket. She just sat down close enough that I could have put my arm around her, but far enough that something about the distance felt deliberate. "Dad," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "What if someone you loved was not who you thought they were?" I looked at her. She was staring at the Douglas fir, not at me. Her hands were pressed together between her knees, the way she used to sit as a child when she was nervous about something. "Honey," I said, "if you are worried about Garrett, every marriage has rough patches. You two will work through it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Yeah. Rough patches." Her voice was flat, empty. She stood up and went inside, and she never brought it up again. She was not asking me about her marriage. I know that now. She was asking me to see what was happening. She was asking me to save her, to save us both, and I told her every marriage has rough patches. I will carry that failure for the rest of my life. Not the failure of losing my house or the failure of trusting the wrong man. The failure of sitting on a porch beside my only daughter while she tried to tell me the truth, and hearing nothing but what I wanted to hear. A father's love is not just a kind of deafness. Sometimes it is a kind of cruelty, the cruelty of reassurance when what your child needs is for you to be alarmed. Colleen tried to warn me, and I missed it. By the end of year 4, Garrett had paid property taxes on my home 4 years running. "One more year," Frank said. "One more year, and he can file an adverse possession claim on the home Catherine and I built with our own hands. The house where my wife planted a tree that was supposed to outlive us both. The house where my daughter sat on the porch and begged me to listen, and I smiled and told her everything would be fine. 1 more year." That number sat in my chest like a stone. 1 more property tax payment, and Garrett Webb could walk into a courthouse and file a legal claim on the home I had built with my own hands. I knew it. Frank knew it. And after what happened at dinner that evening in the fall of 2022, I knew Garrett knew it too. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Pot roast. Colleen had made it the way Catherine used to, with carrots and red potatoes, and for a moment the smell of it almost made the evening feel normal. Then Garrett set down his fork, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me with that slow, measured gaze he had perfected over 5 years of living in my house. "7 years is a long time, Virgil," he said. "The law has a funny way of rewarding the people who actually maintain a place." I did not respond. I set my fork down and I looked at him, and I felt something shift inside my chest that I had been holding back for years. Not anger, something colder. The recognition that the man sitting across from me had just told me to my face in my kitchen that he intended to take my home. And he was smiling while he said it. Colleen's head snapped toward him. "Garrett, that is enough. Not tonight. Not tonight. Not ever," is what she should have said. But she did not. She looked at me for half a second, then looked away. Her hands were in her lap. Her shoulders were drawn in tight. She looked like a woman who had been told what to say and what not to say, and was doing her best to stay inside those lines. The furnace kicked on beneath the floorboards, a low, familiar rumble that Catherine used to call the house breathing. I pressed my palm flat against the table and felt it hum beneath my skin. This house was alive. It had been alive since 1989. And a man who could not even change the furnace filter was sitting at my table telling me the law was on his side. Garrett stood up, dropped his napkin on his plate, and walked toward the hallway. At the doorway he paused and said, "Without turning around, you will not even see it coming, old man." I sat there. Colleen was clearing dishes. She would not look at me. I listened to Garrett's footsteps go up the stairs, and I listened to the furnace breathe. And I sat in my kitchen alone with the smell of pot roast and the understanding that this was no longer a slow game. He had a lawyer. He had a plan. And he had just told me so. I went to the porch. The autumn air was sharp and cold on the wooden planks. The 10 acres stretched out in front of me in the fading dusk light. The tree line dark against the sky, the Douglas fir standing where Catherine had planted it 33 years ago. I remembered her standing right where I was standing, paint roller in hand, 1989, laughing, because the porch ceiling had turned out 2 shades darker than the sample. "Character," she had said. "Every good house needs a little accident." This was no accident. What Garrett was doing had been calculated from the day he asked how many acres. I went inside and called Frank. He picked up on the second ring the way he always did. I told him what Garrett had said at dinner, word for word. I told him about the 7 years comment, the law rewarding people who maintain a place, the smile, the "you will not even see it coming." Frank was quiet for a long time. I could hear his chickens in the background and the creak of his porch chair. Virgil Frank said if he said 7 years, he is talking adverse possession. Not maybe, not probably. He has a lawyer, and they have been counting the same years we have been counting. You need to call a lawyer. Yesterday. I know, I said. No, Frank said. You do not know. Because knowing and doing something about it are two different things, and you have been on the knowing side for too long. Start documenting everything. Every conversation, every receipt, every time he so much as moves a chair. And do not open any legal documents alone. You hear me? If anything comes in the mail, you bring it to me first. I told him I would. I hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the silence. The house was breathing. Garrett was upstairs. Colleen was in the guest room with the door closed. And I was standing in the middle of my own home feeling like a stranger. I did not survive 40 Montana winters in this house to lose it to a man who could not change the furnace filter. I said that to myself as I walked back to the porch to lock the screen door for the night. I said it like a prayer, like a promise. That is when I saw it. A certified envelope wedged into the gap between the screen door and the frame. Stiff legal paper. My name typed on the front in clean black letters. I pulled it out, and my hand trembled. Not from fear, I told myself. From the cold. The Montana night had teeth that evening. I turned the envelope over. The return address read, Whitfield and Associates Billings, Montana. I knew that name. That was the firm that had represented the county 2 years ago, when they tried to condemn the Granger farm east of town. Frank had fought them on behalf of the Grangers and won, but he said afterward that the firm was the kind that did not take cases they intended to lose. The envelope was stamped with the next day's date. Whatever was inside had been prepared in advance, filed and ready. This was not a warning. This was a weapon. I did not open it. I held it in both hands, and I looked out at Catherine's tree in the dark, and I understood that the war I had been pretending was not happening had just arrived at my front door. The war had arrived at my front door, but I was not thinking about wars or lawyers or certified envelopes when I pulled into the Riverside General Store parking lot on a Thursday morning in late November 2023. I was thinking about luck. Catherine always said we had used ours up the day we found each other. I never argued with her about that. But standing in the store that morning, staring at the lottery display behind the counter, something told me to try. The store smelled the way it always did, coffee and motor oil and the faint sweetness of the candy aisle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A security camera sat in the corner above the register, its little red light blinking. I did not think about that camera. Not yet. I bought 3 Montana Mega Millions tickets on December 2nd, 2023, a Saturday morning. $5 each. I paid with my Visa card, and the machine beeped as it processed the charge. The clerk handed me the tickets, and I stood there for a moment, looking at them, 3 thin slips of paper lighter than the envelope that had been jammed into my screen door weeks before. I almost bought 2. Something told me to buy 3. Catherine's voice, maybe. Or the engineer in me who never liked even numbers when odd ones would do. I kept the first ticket for myself and tucked it into my wallet. The third ticket I slipped into my coat pocket. That one was meant for Frank. I figured I would drop it off on my way home, but I forgot. The ticket stayed in my coat pocket, and I did not think about it again for a very long time. Now I want you to remember something. Remember that security camera above the register. Remember the Visa card. Remember that I paid for all 3 tickets with my own money, my own name, my own hand. Because later, when everyone started arguing about who that money belonged to, those details were the only things standing between me and ruin. I drove home. Colleen was in the kitchen when I walked in. I held out the second ticket and said, "Maybe you will get lucky, honey." She looked at it and smiled the tired kind of smile she had been wearing for years. "Dad, you know these things are just a tax on hope. maybe I said. But your mother always said hope was worth the tax. She took the ticket and put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. I hung up my coat with the third ticket still in the pocket. And that was that. 3 pieces of paper. $15. A Thursday in November. Nothing about that day suggested it would matter. 3 weeks later, on a cold morning in early December, I was in my bedroom getting dressed when a sound came from downstairs that I had never heard in that house before. Colleen screamed. Not a frightened scream, not pain, something else entirely. The kind of sound a person makes when reality breaks open and something impossible falls through. I came down the stairs as fast as my knees would carry me. Colleen was standing in the kitchen, holding the ticket, the one from the refrigerator, and her hands were shaking so hard the paper was vibrating. Her face was white. Her eyes were wide. She looked at me and she could barely form the words. Dad, oh my God, look at this, $100 million. I will say it again because I had to hear it 3 times myself before the number stopped sounding like a foreign language. $100 million. And it was sitting in my daughter's hand on a slip of paper I had bought for $5 and some small talk at the general store. Colleen was crying and laughing at the same time. She grabbed my arm and pulled me to the kitchen table and laid the ticket down and pointed at the numbers one by one, matching them to the ones on her phone screen. Every single number. I checked it twice. Then I checked it a third time because that is what I do. For about 90 seconds, the kitchen felt the way it used to feel when Catherine was alive. Full, warm. Like the house was holding all of us in its arms. Colleen hugged me, and I hugged her back. And for 90 seconds, I forgot about property taxes and legal envelopes and the man upstairs. Then Garrett came down. He walked into the kitchen, and Colleen told him. I watched his face as she spoke. I have watched a lot of faces in my life. I have sat across tables from county officials and contractors and engineers who were trying to hide what they were thinking, and I have learned to read the thing behind the expression. What I saw on Garrett's face was not joy. It was not surprise. It was calculation. The same look he had given my property the day he stepped out of the truck 6 years earlier. He was measuring. He hugged Colleen. He said the right things. Then he walked into the hallway, took out his phone, and I heard him say 100 million. Yes, the ticket is in her name. I need someone who handles this kind of thing. Within the hour, he was on a second call. By that afternoon, he had driven to Billings and come back wearing a suit I had never seen before. Charcoal gray, the kind of suit that costs more than my monthly pension. He had not owned a suit in 6 years. He bought one the day the ticket hit. Money like that does not arrive. It detonates. And the blast radius, I would learn, reaches everyone you have ever loved. 3 pieces of paper, $5 each. I had no idea those $15 would tear my family apart. But within hours of the news, Garrett Webb was on the phone with lawyers, and I could already feel the temperature in my house dropping. The temperature kept dropping. It started with the smell of cologne. Garrett had never worn cologne in 7 years under my roof. But the Monday after the win, he came downstairs reeking of something expensive and sharp, the kind of scent that announces a man before he enters the room. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, and he walked past me without a word, phone already pressed to his ear, talking about investment portfolios and real estate opportunities, like a man who had been rich his entire life instead of 12 hours. The week after the win, my house became a place I no longer recognized. Garrett was on the phone constantly. He paced the living room. He spread papers across the dining table. He spoke in a voice loud enough to carry through every wall, and I do not believe that was an accident. He wanted me to hear. On Wednesday, I heard him say it. I was in the hallway, and he was in the living room with his back to the door, and his voice was clear as a bell. Montana property has appreciated well, he said. 4 bedrooms, 10 acres, no lions. Yeah, we could clear the structure and start fresh. He was talking about my home. the home Catherine and I had built with our own hands. He was talking about it the way a butcher talks about a carcass, deciding what to keep and what to carve away. Clear the structure. Start fresh. As if 35 years of our life could be scraped off like old paint. Let me be clear about something. I am not a fragile man. I spent 38 years engineering structures that held highways above rivers and kept water systems running through Montana winters that would break a lesser state in half. But hearing a man who had never paid $1 of rent discuss tearing apart the home I built with my wife that required a kind of strength no blueprint ever taught me. I gripped my coffee mug and I did not move. I stood in that hallway and I listened, and I committed every word to memory because that is what engineers do. We document. On Friday, the contractors arrived. 2 men in work boots standing on my front porch, blueprints rolled under their arms, asking for Mr. Webb. I stood in the kitchen and watched through the window as Garrett shook their hands and walked them around the property. They pointed at the roofline. They pointed at the foundation. They unrolled the blueprints on my dining table, the same table where Catherine and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and they talked about demolishing the whole interior. If you are demolishing the whole interior, one of them said, we will need the owner's signature. Garrett did not even blink. That will not be a problem, he said. That will not be a problem. 5 words. Spoken in my house about my house by a man who did not own a single board of it. I stood at the kitchen sink, and I felt my hands shake, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding still when every part of me wanted to walk into that room and throw those blueprints into the yard. But I did not. Not yet. Tuesday morning, 8 days after the win, Garrett came downstairs wearing the charcoal suit shoes, polished, hair combed. His shoes were polished. His hair was combed. He looked like a man arriving at a board meeting, not a man walking into his father-in-law's kitchen. He poured himself a coffee. He did not offer me one. Then he leaned against the counter and said, "Virgil, we should talk about the future." I looked at him. I was sitting at the table with my hands around a mug that had gone cold. "There are some nice places in Billings," he said. "Assisted living. Full care. You would not have to worry about a thing. We would cover it. Think of it as a thank you. A thank you. For what? For building the house he was standing in, for raising the daughter he married, for buying the ticket that made him rich. This is my house, Garrett," I said. "I built it. I am not leaving." He tilted his head. The same slow tilt. The same measuring look. "We do not need your charity anymore, Virgil," he said. I looked at my daughter standing in the kitchen doorway. Colleen was crying. Silently. The way she had been crying for years, I realized without anyone hearing. Her hands were at her sides. Her feet were planted. She was not moving toward me. She was not moving toward him. She was standing in the space between, and the space between was the loneliest place I had ever seen a person stand. That is a sight no parent should have to interpret. Your child's tears falling while her feet stay planted on the wrong side of the room. "I built this house," I said again. My voice was quiet. I did not raise it. I have never been a man who raises his voice. But I said it the way you say something that is not a negotiation, the way you state a fact that does not require agreement. Garrett laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Something worse. The laugh of a man who believed the conversation was already over. "For now," he said, and he walked out of my kitchen. The room where Catherine and I had sat on the last night of every year drinking cider and talking about the one ahead. The room where I had cooked pot roast for 3 people and told myself this was family. The room where a man in a suit that cost more than my pension had just told me to leave. I stood there alone. And for the first time in my life, I began to plan not how to build something, but how to take something back. I stood up slowly. I looked at Garrett Webb across my kitchen, and I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled since the lottery win, and it unsettled him more than anything I could have shouted. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled around the edge of the counter. "Good. You bought 3 tickets," I said. His eyes narrowed. "What?" "3 tickets. December 2nd. Riverside General Store. I bought 3 $5 Montana Mega Millions tickets at 11:14 in the morning. I paid with my Visa card, the one ending in 4209. I let each detail land like a nail-driven flush into hardwood. The security camera above the register recorded the entire transaction. You can see my face, my hands, and the 3 tickets the clerk slid across the counter. Garrett's face began to lose color. Not all at once. It drained the way water leaves a basin when the stopper is pulled slow at first, then with an inevitability that nothing can reverse. Ticket number 1. I continued. I kept. It is in this house. Ticket number 2 I handed to Colleen as a gift. A $5 gift. And ticket number 3. I paused. I let the silence fill the kitchen the way cold fills a room when a furnace dies. "Well, that one is none of your concern. You're bluffing," Garrett said. But his voice had thinned. The confidence that had strutted through my hallways for 7 years was cracking at the seams like cheap drywall. Now let me tell you something about bearer instruments. Under Montana Code 237402, a lottery ticket is a bearer instrument. That means the person holding the ticket owns the prize, not the person whose name is scribbled on the back, not the person who screamed when they checked the numbers, the person holding the paper. I had purchased all 3 tickets. I had the Visa receipt, I had the timestamp, and I had the security footage that proved every word I had just spoken. Garrett stared at me for a long time. Then he left the kitchen without a word. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate, and then the bedroom door slammed hard enough to rattle the photographs in the hallway. Catherine's anniversary picture, the one he had moved 3 times, swung crooked on its nail. I did not fix it, not yet. I walked down the hall to my bedroom. The room was small, unchanged, since Catherine and I had hung the curtains in 1991. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the mattress dip beneath me in the same groove it always had, her side still slightly higher, as though the foam remembered her weight better than it remembered mine. I opened the walnut desk beside the window. The drawer slid out with the creak of old wood and linseed oil. Inside, beneath a stack of Water District survey maps and 2 expired fishing licenses, I found what I was looking for. Ticket number 1, and beneath it the Visa receipt. I held them both under the lamp. The ticket was unremarkable. $5 of hope printed on flimsy paper. The receipt was a thin curl of thermal stock already beginning to fade at the edges. Together, they were worth more than everything Garrett had schemed for across 7 patient, poisonous years. I photographed both with my phone, front and back. I placed them in a sealed envelope and wrote the date across the flap in permanent marker, my handwriting, my ink, my proof. Then I returned them to the walnut desk beneath the survey maps and closed the drawer. Have you ever held something small enough to fit in your palm and known it could change the course of your entire life? That is what it felt like. Not power, not triumph, just certainty. The certainty of an engineer who has measured twice and knows the structure will hold. I waited until 11 that night. Garrett's light had been off for an hour. Colleen's, too. The house was silent, except for the furnace cycling beneath the floorboards and the December wind pushing against the windows. I picked up the phone and called Frank Ballard. He answered on the second ring. Frank always answered on the second ring, as though the first ring was for deciding whether to pick up, and the second was for committing to it. "I need a lawyer," I said. "Well, it's about damn time," Frank replied. "I know someone, sharp, out of Billings. Her name is Nadine Harrington, 46 years old, former state prosecutor, now in private practice, specializing in property and probate disputes. She does not lose often, and when she does, she makes the other side wish they had settled. Can she handle something like this? Virgil. She handled the Granger Farm case in 2019. That was adverse possession, eminent domain, and a county commissioner who thought he was untouchable. She buried him in his own paperwork. If anyone can help you, it is Nadine. I wrote down her number on the back of a power bill. My hand was steady. My breathing was even. For the first time in 7 years, I was not reacting to Garrett Webb. I was planning. Frank said one more thing before we hung up. Call her first thing tomorrow. Do not wait. And Virgil, do not tell Colleen. Not yet. I agreed. I set the phone on the nightstand. I turned off the lamp. Outside, the Montana sky was dark and cold and full of stars that had been there long before Garrett Webb and would remain long after he was gone. I lay in the bed Catherine and I had shared for 28 years, and I stared at the ceiling. I did not sleep. But for the first time in 7 years, I was not lying awake out of worry. I was lying awake because I had a direction, and I knew exactly where I was going. Wednesday morning, Frank pulled his truck into my driveway at 7:30, engine running, coffee in the cup holder, and a look on his face I had not seen since the day we drove to Helena to fight the waterboard. It was the look of a man who had been waiting a long time to go to war on behalf of a friend. I climbed in without a word. The manila envelope sat on my lap, sealed with the date written across the flap in my own hand. Inside it were ticket number 1 and the visa receipt. 2 pieces of paper that weighed almost nothing and meant almost everything. Frank backed out of the driveway, turned onto the county road, and pointed us toward Billings. 2 hours through flat winter Montana, the highway cutting straight across frozen fields, under a sky the color of old concrete. The truck hummed beneath us, steady and familiar, and neither of us spoke for the first 40 miles. We did not need to. Frank knew what we were driving toward, and I knew what I was leaving behind. Nadine Harrington's office was on the 4th floor of the Rimrock building in downtown Billings, a narrow room with tall windows and bookshelves that covered 3 walls floor to ceiling. The place smelled like old leather and coffee, the kind of coffee that has been sitting on a warmer since 6 in the morning, and no one has bothered to make a fresh pot because everyone in the building has more important things to worry about. Let me tell you something about Nadine Harrington. She was 5'4" with reading glasses on a silver chain and a voice so quiet it made you lean in to hear every word. She was 46 years old, a former state prosecutor who had left the government to open her own practice specializing in property and probate disputes. She had forced the county to publicly apologize to the Granger family in 2019, and she had not lost a property case in 11 years. She was the most dangerous person in that building, and I knew it the moment she picked up my visa receipt, held it to the window light, and tapped it once against the glass surface of her desk. "That this is your foundation," she said. "Everything else we build on top of it." I told her everything. 7 years of Garrett Webb living in my house. The furniture rearrangements. The property taxes paid in his name for 4 consecutive years. The adverse possession timeline. The certified envelope from Whitfield and Associates. The lottery tickets, the security camera footage, the kitchen confrontation. I laid it out the way I used to present hydraulic surveys to review boards, in order with evidence and without emotion. Nadine listened with a yellow legal pad in front of her, writing nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then she picked up her pen and began. She explained the dual strategy. First, a formal lottery dispute notice under Montana Code 23-7-402. The statute was clear: a lottery ticket is a bearer instrument. I had purchased it, I had the receipt, and there was camera footage showing the transaction. That ticket belonged to me until a court ruled otherwise, and she was confident no court would. Second, injunctive relief, to block Garrett from making a 5th consecutive property tax payment, which would complete the adverse possession timeline. If we could freeze that payment, his claim on the house would collapse. She spoke the way I used to read blueprints. Every line had a purpose. Every word bore weight. I knew within 5 minutes that Frank had not just found me a lawyer. He had found me an engineer who worked in statutes instead of steel. Then Nadine stopped. She set down her pen, looked at her computer screen, and said 3 words I will never forget. He filed first. Garrett's attorney had submitted a preliminary claim on the lottery winnings that morning, 7 hours before Frank and I had walked through the door. The filing was time-stamped at 8:14 in the morning, which meant Garrett had not slept either. While I had been lying in bed with direction and certainty, he had been on the phone with a lawyer racing to stake his claim before I could stake mine. Nadine did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She removed her reading glasses, set them on the desk, and said, "Then we file today. Right now. We have until 4 o'clock to get a counter-filing on record, or we lose the procedural advantage entirely." She looked at Frank. "I hope you did not have afternoon plans." Frank shook his head. "I cleared the week." What followed was 5 hours of the most precise, relentless legal work I have ever witnessed. Nadine drafted 3 separate filings. She made 4 phone calls. She sent me to a notary on the 2nd floor to get the visa receipt authenticated. And when I came back, she had already prepared a motion for emergency injunctive relief on the property tax issue. I signed my name 11 times. I initialed 26 pages. I answered every question she asked with the exactness of a man who had spent 38 years documenting water pressure readings to the 10th of a decimal. We filed at 4 o'clock. The clerk stamped the last page at 3:57. By 6, I was in Frank's truck heading home on the highway, watching the flat Montana fields slide past in the winter light. The sun was already behind the mountains. The cab was warm. Frank drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and I sat with my eyes half closed, feeling something I had not felt in years. Not victory, not relief. Something closer to the sensation of watching a foundation set properly after a long pour. The knowledge that the structure would hold. Then my phone began to buzz, not once, not twice, 23 times. Have you ever watched a man's panic arrive on your phone, one notification at a time? Each vibration rattled against the plastic cup holder like a tiny, furious heartbeat. 23 missed calls from Garrett Webb. Not 22. Not 24. 23. Each one was a small, satisfying confirmation that the old man he had tried to send to assisted living had beaten him to the courthouse. I did not answer a single one. Let him sweat. But when Frank dropped me at the end of the driveway and I walked through the front door, the house was silent. Every light was off. Colleen's car was gone. Every light in the house was on. Every single one. Upstairs, downstairs, the porch, the garage. I could see the glow from the end of the driveway where Frank had let me out, and it looked like a building burning from the inside. I stood in the cold for a moment, listening to Frank's truck pull away behind me. And then I walked toward my own front door, the way you walk toward something you built with your own hands that someone else has set on fire. Colleen's car was in the driveway, so she had come back. But the moment I stepped inside, I understood that her return was not a comfort. It was a warning. Garrett was pacing the living room. His tie was loosened, his sleeves were rolled, and his face had the color of a man who had been screaming before I arrived and was preparing to start again. The air smelled like his cologne, and something sharper underneath it, the sour edge of sweat that comes from rage held too long in a closed room. "You senile fool," he said before I had closed the door behind me. I closed it anyway, gently. "You think some small-town lawyer is going to beat me?" He was pointing at me now, his finger jabbing the air between us like he was trying to puncture something. "I will have you declared incompetent by Friday. Do you understand that, Friday? You will not be able to sign your own name on a check." I set my coat on the kitchen chair. I did not raise my voice. "What do you want, Garrett?" $500,000. He said it like he was doing me a favor. "Take the $500,000. Sign over the ticket claim. Walk away." I'll set you up in a nice place in town. You can fish, play cards, do whatever it is old men do. Everyone wins. $500,000. I want you to sit with that number for a moment, because I sat with it standing 3 feet from the man who said it. That is what my home was worth to Garrett Webb. That is what my dignity cost. That is what he calculated as the price for a 72-year-old man to disappear from his own life. $500,000 for a house I built, with my hands a marriage I honored for 41 years, and a daughter I raised from the day she drew her first breath. He had done the arithmetic on my entire existence and rounded down. "Don't want your money, Garrett," I said. "Want you out of my house." His face changed. The salesman vanished, and what replaced it was something I had seen in small, controlled flashes over 7 years, but never at full volume. Pure contempt. He stepped toward me until I could smell the coffee on his breath and see the vein pulsing at his temple. "You want war, old man." His voice dropped low. "I will destroy you. I will take this house. I will take that ticket. And when I am done, you won't have a roof or a daughter or a dime." I did not step back. I held his gaze the way I used to hold a level against a crooked beam, steady and certain, letting the instrument do the talking. "We'll see about that," I said. Garrett stared at me for 3 seconds. Then he turned, grabbed his keys from the hallway table, and slammed the front door so hard the walls shook. Catherine's anniversary photograph swung on its nail. The glass in the frame over the thermostat cracked down the center with a sound like a single knuckle popping. I looked at Colleen. She was sitting on the couch with her hands pressed together between her knees, tears running down both cheeks, not making a sound. My daughter, the girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms and press her ear against my chest because she said my heartbeat was louder than the thunder. She could not even look at me. I wanted to sit beside her. I wanted to tell her everything would be all right. But I did not know if that was true, and I have never been a man who says things he cannot verify, so I said nothing. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. When I turned back, Colleen had gone upstairs. The couch cushion where she had been sitting was still warm. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one I had walked into. This one had teeth. I did not sleep well that night. At 7 the next morning, my phone rang. It was Nadine. "Virgil, they filed a motion for a medical competency evaluation." Her voice was calm and precise the way it always was, but there was something underneath it I had not heard before. An edge. "They are claiming diminished capacity, that you were not of sound mind when you purchased the tickets or when you authorized the legal filings yesterday." I sat down at the kitchen table. The chair creaked beneath me. The morning light through the window was thin and gray, the kind of December light that makes everything in a room look older than it is. "I designed the water system that kept this county alive for 38 years, I said. "Every joint, every pressure calculation, every decimal point documented and filed." "Good," Nadine replied. "Because that is exactly the kind of record we are going to need. This is their dirtiest card, Virgil, and they just played it early. That tells me they are scared. Scared people make mistakes. A competency challenge. Let me explain what that is in terms I understand. In engineering, we call it a controlled demolition. You do not attack the whole structure. You identify the foundation, you undercut it, and you let gravity do the rest." Garrett was not trying to beat me in court on the merits. He was trying to erase me before I ever got there. If a judge ruled that I lacked the mental capacity to make legal decisions, every filing Nadine had submitted would collapse. The ticket claim, the injunction, all of it. Gone. I put the phone down. They were going to try to prove I was crazy. A 72-year-old man who had designed water systems that served half the county for 38 years. A man with documentation habits that would make an archivist weep. They wanted to call me incompetent. Fine, let them try. But as I set the phone on the table, my hand brushed my coat still hanging on the kitchen chair, and I felt something stiff in the inside pocket. Paper. Thin, familiar, slightly bent at one corner. I had forgotten all about it. Frank's voice on the phone that Thursday evening was strange. Not worried, not angry. Something I could not quite place. Careful, maybe. The way a man sounds when he is about to hand you something fragile and does not want you to drop it. "Come over," he said. "There are some people who want to talk to you." I did not ask who. I did not ask why. After the morning I had just survived, after hearing the word incompetent spoken by my own attorney in reference to what Garrett's lawyers were trying to do to me, I had spent the day sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I never finished staring at the wall and running calculations in my head. Not water pressure calculations, survival calculations. What I had, what I needed, what I was missing. Frank's call interrupted that math, and something in the tone told me I should get in the truck. I drove to Frank's house in 12 minutes. The porch light was on, and there were cars lining both sides of the road. 6, 7, maybe 8 vehicles. More than Frank usually had for a Thursday evening. More than Frank usually had for anything. I walked up the steps and through the front door, and I stopped. Frank's living room was full. 12 people seated in folding chairs on the arms of the couch, leaning against the bookshelf by the window. The room smelled like fresh coffee and warm bodies and the faint pine scent of the logs stacked by the fireplace. Folding chairs creaked as people shifted to see me in the doorway. I stood there, and I could not speak. Some of these faces I had known for decades. Some I only recognized from the general store or the post office or the parking lot after Sunday service. But every single one of them was looking at me. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with something I had not seen directed at me in a very long time. Purpose. I am not a man who cries easily. I have buried a wife. I have endured 7 years of a man dismantling my home from the inside. But I will tell you this. I had to look at the ceiling for a long moment before I could say hello. Frank stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder. "Sit down, Virgil. These folks have something to say." The first to speak was Pastor Leland Frost, who had led the Riverside Springs congregation for 22 years and had a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. The kind that made you believe whatever came after the words, "Let me tell you something." "Virgil," he said, leaning forward in his chair with his elbows on his knees. "We have been watching. This town does not forget its own. You tell us where to show up and when, and we will be there. Every one of us." The room murmured in agreement. Folding chairs creaked again. Someone in the back said, "Amen," and it did not sound religious. It sounded like a promise. Then Lorraine Everett stood up. She was a retired psychiatric nurse with 31 years at the state hospital in Warm Springs. A woman who had evaluated thousands of minds over 3 decades and who could spot cognitive decline the way a mechanic spots engine trouble from across the room and without lifting the hood. "I heard what they are trying to do," Lorraine said. "A competency challenge. I know what diminished capacity looks like, Virgil. I have testified about it in court more times than I can count. And you, sir, are the sharpest person in this room. I will say that under oath. You just tell me when. Let me tell you what 12 affidavits mean in a small Montana town. It means 12 people willing to put their names on a piece of paper, knowing full well that a man with $100 million and a team of lawyers might come after them next. It means 12 people who decided that being uncomfortable was a small price for doing what was right. Garrett had money. I had signatures. And I promise you, those signatures were heavier. Frank had prepared the paperwork. Of course he had. He passed out the affidavit forms, pre-typed, each one personalized with the signer's name and a space for their statement. He had been planning this since the morning I told him about the competency motion. Maybe longer. That was Frank. He did not announce his loyalty. He built it in advance and revealed it when you needed it most. One by one they signed. The scratch of pen on paper filled the room like a kind of music. I watched each hand move across the page and I memorized every face. The last to sign was Deputy Ray Kendrick. He sat in the corner in civilian clothes, a quiet, broad-shouldered man who had patrolled the county for 15 years and who, it turned out, had been documenting Garrett Webb long before anyone asked him to. I have responded to 3 noise complaints at your address in the last 2 years. Kendrick said, his voice low and steady. All 3 times it was Garrett doing the yelling. All 3 times you were calm. I documented every incident. Dates, times, observations. It is all on file at the station. The room went quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. The kind that comes when everyone in a room understands that something just changed. Kendrick's reports were not character references. They were official law enforcement records. Garrett had built his case like a man who only understands money. Throw enough at the wall and something sticks. But he never accounted for the mortar. In a small town, the mortar between people is made of decades. You cannot buy it. You cannot file a motion against it. And you cannot demolish it with a contractor and a charcoal suit. I shook every hand. I thanked every person. I carried the 12 signed affidavits to my truck in a neat stack, and the cold night air hit my face as I stepped off Frank's porch. The papers were crisp under my fingers. They smelled like ink and coffee, and something I can only describe as conviction. I drove home with those 12 affidavits on the passenger seat beside me. Garrett thought he had money, but I had something he would never understand. I had people who had been watching. Small towns see everything, and small towns do not forget. When I pulled into the driveway and my headlights swept across the front of the house, I saw her, Colleen, sitting alone on the front steps in the dark, her arms wrapped around her knees, waiting for me. Colleen and I did not talk long that night on the steps. She asked if I was okay. I said I was. She asked where I had been. I told her I had been at Frank's. She nodded and looked at her hands, and after a moment she went inside without asking anything else. Whatever she had come out to say, she decided to save it. I let her. 3 days passed. And then Sunday morning I woke to a smell I had not encountered in my kitchen in months: fresh pancakes. That terrified me more than anything Garrett had done so far. Because cruelty, I understood. Cruelty had a shape and a schedule, and I had learned to engineer around it the way you engineer around a fault line. But kindness from a man like Garrett Webb meant he wanted something he could not take by force. I came downstairs in my slippers and found him at the stove. Butter sizzling in the cast iron, a stack of pancakes on a plate, coffee already poured. Colleen was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug, and the expression on her face was something between hope and dread, like a woman watching someone try to defuse a bomb with a smile. Garrett turned and nodded at me, pleasant, warm even. As if the man who had called me senile and threatened to destroy me 4 days ago had been replaced overnight by a reasonably decent human being. He set a plate in front of me without a word, and I sat down because refusing pancakes from a dangerous man tells him you are afraid, and I was not going to give him that. We ate in silence for 3 minutes. Then Garrett set down his fork. "I've been thinking," he said. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand. Lawyers, filings, threats. None of it is good for anybody, especially not for Colleen." He glanced at her. She looked down at her coffee. "So here is what I am proposing. $3 million for a house anywhere you want. $5 million in a trust fund managed independently income for the rest of your life. You live like a king. No more lawyers, no more stress. We all walk away clean. $8 million. Have you ever stood in a kitchen at 72 years old and tried to calculate what the rest of your life is worth a new house. No lawyers. No Garrett in my hallway. No more war. I could be in Arizona by spring, sitting on a porch that did not carry the weight of 40 years of memory. $8 million can buy a lot of silence. It can buy comfort and distance and the kind of peace that looks real from the outside. But it cannot buy back the thing Garrett was really asking me to sell. He was not offering me a house. He was offering me permission to disappear from my own life, and he was packaging it with butter and maple syrup. I did not answer immediately. I pushed back from the table and walked down the hall to the bathroom. I closed the door. The tile was cold under my bare feet, and the small window above the toilet let in a stripe of gray December light that cut across the mirror. I stood there for 2.5 minutes. I know because I counted. An engineer counts. An engineer does not make decisions based on the heat of a moment. He measures, he calculates, and then he commits. $8 million. No more fighting. A clean exit. I looked at the mirror, and Catherine looked back at me. Not literally. She was in the photograph on the shelf behind my shoulder, the one from our 30th anniversary, the one where she is holding my hand and squinting into the August sun with her hair blowing sideways. But I swear her eyes found mine in that glass. And she was not smiling. She was waiting to see what kind of man I still was. Waiting to see if 41 years of marriage to her had built something in me that $8 million could not unbuild. That evening, after Garrett went upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen. At 10:47 p.m., my phone rang. Garrett's voice, loud and careless, carried through the heating vents from the upstairs hallway. "Jackson, listen to me. If the old man doesn't take the money, we make him look incompetent, confused. Focus on the pauses, the memory gaps. Make it look like age-related decline, whatever it takes." I pulled out my phone. Montana is a one-party consent state. I pressed record and held it toward the vent. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Every word. When he finally hung up, I sent the file to Nadine with a single line. "You need to hear this." Her reply came at 11:03 p.m. "Perfect. That's witness intimidation and conspiracy. This changes everything." I turned off the light. I walked back to the kitchen. Garrett and Colleen were both watching the hallway, and the silence between them had the texture of held breath. "I'll think about it," I said. Garrett's shoulders relaxed. He nodded slowly the way a man nods when he believes he has won, but does not want to celebrate too soon. Colleen's eyes met mine for half a second, and in that half second, I saw something I had not expected. Relief. She wanted me to take it. She wanted this to be over. And that almost broke me more than anything Garrett had ever said, because it meant my daughter believed that peace was something you purchase, rather than something you build. I spent the rest of the day in the garage. I did not think about the offer. I thought about pressure ratings and joint specifications and the satisfying certainty of numbers that do not negotiate. I rebuilt the hinge on the garage door that had been sticking since October, and I let my hands do what they have always done best. Solve problems that have verifiable answers. Let me tell you what $8 million sounds like when it comes out of the mouth of a man who called you senile 4 days ago. It sounds like a confession. It sounds like a man who has done the math on his own position and realized the numbers do not add up. It sounds like fear dressed in generosity. Nadine heard it too. I called her that evening, told her about the offer. She was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had weight. "Hold the course," she said. "If they are offering $8 million to make this go away, it means they are terrified of what a formal proceeding looks like. That number is not generosity, Virgil. It is a measurement of how much trouble they know they are in." I leaned against the kitchen counter. The house was still around me. Garrett had gone upstairs an hour ago. Colleen's light was off. Then Nadine said something else. Her voice dropped the way it does when a person is about to hand you something fragile. And Virgil, I found something. Can you come to Billings Wednesday? There is something you need to see. She would not say what. I asked twice and she declined both times. But the way her voice changed on that last sentence told me everything I needed to know. Whatever she had found, it was the kind of thing you do not put on a phone line. I hung up. The click of the receiver was the only sound in the house. I stood in the kitchen and I listened to the silence. And for the first time in this entire fight, the silence did not feel like something closing in. It felt like something opening up. Nadine did not say hello when I walked into her office Wednesday afternoon. She pointed at a chair, slid a printed page across the dark wood of the desk, and said 4 words. Read the date first. I sat down. The page was crisp and white, a printed email, and the font was small and clean, the way legal correspondence always is designed to look neutral while delivering something that is anything but. My eyes went to the top of the page where the date line sat in plain black type. November 15th, 2023. I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time, and then I stopped reading and started counting. November 15th. I had walked into the Riverside General Store and bought 3 lottery tickets on December 2nd. That was 17 days later. Garrett had sent this email 17 days before the lottery tickets existed. 17 days before Colleen screamed at the kitchen table. 17 days before any of this. The email was addressed to a man named Jackson Pierce, a Denver attorney, whose name I had never heard spoken in my house, but who, as I would learn in the next 40 minutes, had been quietly orchestrating the legal architecture of my destruction for months. The subject line read, Property Acquisition Timeline. I looked up at Nadine. She was watching me the way a doctor watches a patient after delivering a diagnosis, giving me room to absorb it before saying anything more. Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something I recognized from my years presenting to review boards, the barely contained energy of someone who knows they are holding the winning hand. November 15th, she said. 2 weeks before you bought a single lottery ticket. He was already planning to take your house. The lottery did not start this, Virgil. It just gave him a bigger budget. November 15th, 2023. I sat in that chair and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not the way it shifts in an earthquake, sudden and violent. The way it shifts when you realize the land you have been standing on was never solid to begin with. Every dinner Garrett had eaten at my table. Every time he had said good morning. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every evening, he sat in my living room watching my television in my house that I built with my hands. All of it had been positioning. All of it had been strategy. I had been housing my own demolition crew for 7 years, and they had been drawing up the blueprints the entire time. Nadine let me sit with it. Then she turned the page over and pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the email. I read it slowly. Removal of current deed holder. That is what the email said. Not Virgil, not my father-in-law, not even the homeowner. Current deed holder. 4 words that reduced 41 years of marriage, 38 years of engineering service, and a house I had framed with my own 2 hands into a line item on a legal strategy memo. Let me tell you what it feels like to read your own existence converted into a category in an email written by the man who sleeps down the hall from you. It feels like discovering that the person you fed and housed and tolerated for 7 years never once saw you as a human being. You were an obstacle, a variable to be removed so the equation could balance. Nadine opened a manila folder and laid 6 more emails on the desk. 7 total. Each one between Garrett Webb and Jackson Pierce, spanning from October through late November 2023. They outlined the adverse possession tax strategy in explicit detail. Year 5 completion was projected for the following spring. The competency challenge was referenced as a contingency plan, a backup in case the property claim met resistance. Every thread I had been fighting, every motion Garrett's lawyers had filed, every insult and threat and bribe, all of it was documented in these emails weeks before the lottery ever entered the picture. And then Nadine said the thing that connected everything. Jackson Pierce, she said, tapping the name on the first email. Denver attorney, corporate real estate specialist. Do you recognize the name? I shook my head. You should. He is the same attorney who filed the competency motion against you last week. The same man arguing that you lack the mental capacity to manage your own affairs is the same man who has been conspiring with your son-in-law to steal your property since before the lottery existed. I leaned back in the chair. It creaked beneath me. The sound of my own breathing was the loudest thing in the room. Jackson Pierce, the architect of the property scheme and the lawyer trying to have me declared incompetent, were the same person. This was not two separate battles. It had never been two separate battles. It was one coordinated attack, and every piece of it had been planned before I ever spent $15 at a general store. Nadine laid all 7 emails on the desk in chronological order. They looked like a blueprint, and I would know because I have read thousands in my career. Except this blueprint was not for a water system or a bridge or a treatment facility. It was for dismantling a 72-year-old man's entire life, one filing at a time. And the architect had been sleeping down the hall from me. Mediation is January 18th, Nadine said. Her voice had turned to steel. 2 weeks. This email is our nuclear weapon, Virgil. They do not know we have it. And when we walk into that room, they are going to find out. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls. Just the highway and the winter light fading over the fields and the weight of 7 emails sitting in a folder on the passenger seat. When I pulled into the driveway, I walked inside and sat down in Catherine's chair. The old armchair by the fireplace, the one that still held the shape of her. The upholstery gave beneath me the way it always did. What kind of person plans to steal his father-in-law's house before the lottery even existed? I looked at Catherine's photograph on the mantel. The late afternoon light caught the glass and turned her face golden. We are going to be ready, I said out loud to the empty room, and I meant it. But when I heard the kitchen door open an hour later, I stood and walked around the corner. Garrett was sitting at the table across from a woman I had never seen before. She had a briefcase, a legal pad, and the kind of posture that belongs to someone who charges by the hour. Colleen was nowhere in the house, and the moment I appeared in the doorway, both of them stopped talking. 2 weeks to prepare. The mediation date sat on the calendar like a detonation timer, January 18th. And in those 14 days, I learned something about myself I wish I had known earlier. A man can lose 8 pounds, half his sleep, and most of his appetite, and still be the sharpest version of himself he has ever been. The cost just shows up in different places. The woman at the kitchen table that Wednesday night turned out to be a paralegal from Jackson Pierce's firm. She left within the hour, and I did not ask Garrett a single question about her. I did not need to. I already knew more about his legal strategy than he realized. And every new face he brought into my house was just another confirmation that he was spending money at a pace that suggested panic. The days compressed. Nadine filed subpoenas for the Riverside General Store security footage and the Visa transaction records. She prepared depositions from 3 of the 12 affidavit signers. She called me every other day with updates, and every call ended the same way. Stay steady. We are building something they cannot break. But the building was breaking me. 8 pounds in 2 weeks. I want you to understand what that means for a 72-year-old man who was already lean from a lifetime of physical work. It means belts tightened to holes that did not exist before. It means standing in front of the bathroom mirror and seeing the bones in my collarbone for the first time since I was 25. It means Frank Ballard showing up at my door at 11 at night, holding a bowl of soup like it was medicine, standing in my kitchen with his arms crossed and refusing to leave until I finished every spoonful. "Or you are not eating," Frank said on the 4th night. "Eat the soup or I am calling Lorraine, and she will come over here and make you eat it. And she is meaner than I am." I ate the soup. Not because I was hungry, but because Frank had driven 12 minutes in the dark to bring it to me. And that kind of loyalty deserves at least the courtesy of an empty bowl. Frank stayed several nights during those 2 weeks. He slept on the couch with a quilt Catherine had made in 1998, and he never once complained about the springs. Some mornings I found coffee already made when I came downstairs, and those mornings were the only ones that did not feel like walking into a war zone. Jackson Pierce arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. He walked into my house with 3 associates and matching briefcases, the Denver attorney, from those November emails now physically present in my hallway, and not one of them looked at me. They carried boxes into the guest room and closed the door. Within an hour, I could hear a printer running. My house had been converted into opposing counsel's office, and I was paying the electric bill. I said nothing. I documented. I photographed the boxes, the printer, the closed door. Every detail. An engineer's habit. A survivor's instinct. The nights were the hardest. January in Montana is a special kind of cold, the kind that does not howl or bite, but simply presses against you like a weight patient and absolute. On January 16th, the night before mediation, I could not sleep. I got out of bed at 2 a.m, put on my coat and boots, and walked out the front door into the yard. Catherine's Douglas fir stood in the center of the front yard, where she had planted it in 1991. It was 33 years old now, taller than the house, and in the winter moonlight, its branches threw shadows across the frozen ground, like dark fingers reaching for the porch. I walked to it and pressed my forehead against the bark. It was rough and frozen and smelled like resin and every winter we had ever shared. I whispered to her the way I had for 2 years. Not because I believed she could hear me, because saying the words out loud made them real and I needed them to be real. Catherine, I do not know if I am fighting for the house or fighting because I do not know how to stop. Tell me I am doing the right thing. Tell me this is worth what it is costing. The tree did not answer. Trees never do. But the cold air filled my lungs like a kind of clarity, and I stood there until my fingers went numb. And when I finally turned back toward the house, I felt something I had not felt in 2 weeks. Stillness, not peace, just the absence of noise. Then, at 3 a.m. on January 17th, the noise came back. I was still outside, sitting on the porch steps with a blanket around my shoulders, when I heard the kitchen door open on the far side of the house. Garrett's voice carried through the still night air with the precision of sound, traveling across frozen ground. He was on the phone, and he was not whispering carefully enough. It make him look confused. Focus on the pauses, the repetition, age-related decline. The judge has seen it 100 times. A pause, then lower but still audible. Whatever it takes, Jackson. Whatever it takes. My hands were not shaking from the cold. They were shaking from certainty. He was going to fabricate evidence of cognitive decline. He was coaching his attorney to lie about my mind under oath, and he did not know I was 10 feet away in the dark. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The screen glowed faint blue against my chest. I opened the voice recorder, pressed the red button, and held the phone toward the sound of his voice. Garrett talked for 4 more minutes. I captured every word. When he went back inside, I sent the audio file to Nadine. My fingers were so cold, I had to type her number 3 times. The message went through at 3:08 a.m. Her reply came at 3:15. 7 minutes. She had been awake too. Perfect. That is intimidation and conspiracy on recording. Sleep, Virgil. Tomorrow we end this. I did not sleep, but I was ready. I stood under Catherine's tree in the freezing dark, the phone in my pocket carrying the recording that would change everything. And I watched the first gray light of January 18th crack across the Montana sky like a line drawn on a blueprint. The horizon split open, slow and cold and certain. Today, Frank drove because my hands would not stop shaking. Not from fear, from the kind of adrenaline that comes when you have spent 2 months building something and you are about to find out if it holds. The highway between Riverside Springs and Helena is 3 hours of nothing but frozen fields and gray sky, and neither of us said a word for the first 100 miles. Frank kept both hands on the wheel. I kept my folder on my lap. Inside it were the 12 affidavits, the visa receipt, the subpoenaed security footage on a flash drive, and Nadine's printed copies of 7 emails. In my coat pocket, my phone held a 4-minute audio recording. That was everything. That was the whole war reduced to paper and data. We arrived at the Montana State Lottery Commission building in Helena at 8:45. 7th floor. A hearing room with beige walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects, and a long table with a water pitcher nobody would touch. Nadine was already seated on the left side, her folder open, her pen aligned parallel to the edge of the table. She nodded at me once. I sat down. Frank took the chair behind me. On the other side of the table sat Jackson Pierce, 2 associates in matching dark suits, and Garrett. Garrett wore the charcoal suit. He did not look at me, and beside him at the far end of their row sat Colleen, my daughter. On the other side of the table from her father. I want you to picture this room. Beige walls, buzzing lights, a water pitcher sweating condensation that nobody wiped away. On one side, a retired engineer in a borrowed tie, his best friend, and a 5'4" attorney with reading glasses on a chain. On the other side, a Denver legal team with matching briefcases, a man in an expensive suit, and my own daughter. That is what $100 million does to a family. It draws a line down the center of a table and puts the people who love each other on opposite sides. At the head of the table sat Barbara Thornton. She had silver-framed reading glasses and a stillness about her that suggested she had heard every lie a hearing room could produce and had stopped being impressed by any of them. She was the mediator appointed by the Lottery Commission, and when she spoke, the room obeyed. "We'll begin," she said, nothing more. Jackson Pierce stood first. He was polished. I will give him that. His voice filled the room without strain, and his argument was cleaner than I had expected. He cited gift law. He cited precedent. He described the moment I handed Colleen the ticket at the kitchen table and said the words, "Maybe you will get lucky," and he framed that sentence as a voluntary, unconditional transfer of property. The ticket became Ms. Prescott's the moment it left her father's hand. Pierce said, "Intention is established by action and language. Both are clear." The room was quiet. I felt Frank shift in his chair behind me. For the first time in 2 months, I felt doubt. Not because Pierce was right, because he was good. And good lawyers can make wrong things sound reasonable. Nadine stood. She did not raise her voice. She never did. She placed the visa receipt on the table, followed by a printed still from the security footage showing my face, my hands, and 3 lottery tickets sliding across the counter. A lottery ticket is a bearer instrument under Montana Code 23-7-402, she said. Mr. Prescott purchased all 3 tickets at 10:52 a.m. on December 2nd, 2023, with his personal Visa card. The phrase, "maybe you will get lucky," is a pleasantry. It is not a deed of transfer. There is no signed document. There is no witnessed exchange. There is a father handing his daughter a $5 piece of paper and wishing her well. Barbara Thornton looked at both sides. "We will take a 15-minute recess," she said. "Both parties please remain available." The hallway was cold. Plastic chairs. A vending machine humming against the far wall. Frank handed me a cup of water from the fountain, and I held it without drinking. Have you ever sat in a plastic chair in a government hallway, knowing that what you say in the next hour will determine whether you keep your home, your money, and your dignity, or lose all 3? My mouth was dry, and my hands were perfectly still. That is the paradox of the moment before battle. You have never been calmer, and you have never been more terrified. Before I reveal my next move in that hearing room, I have a quick question for you. If you are still here with me, witnessing this battle for justice, please let me know you're still in the trenches by dropping a comment below. Just comment 1 if you believe standing your ground for the truth is worth more than any $8 million payout. And a quick heads up, the following part of this journey includes some dramatized elements to better convey the emotional weight of the moment. If this isn't for you, feel free to step away now. For the rest of you, let's see how this ends. Barbara called us back in. She looked at me directly for the first time. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "I would like to hear from you in your own words. Why are you here?" I stood. The chair creaked beneath me as I pushed it back. I looked at Barbara Thornton. I did not look at Garrett. I did not look at Pierce. I looked at the woman who would decide. "I gave my daughter a $5 piece of paper," I said. "A hope and a wish. I did not give her $100 million because $100 million did not exist yet. You cannot gift something that does not exist. I bought a ticket." She scratched it. "Those are two different things." Silence. The kind of silence that only happens when every person in a room realizes at the same moment that the argument is over. Jackson Pierce's pen stopped moving. Garrett's jaw tightened. Barbara Thornton set down her notes and looked at me, and in the quiet of that fluorescent room, she said 2 words. That was clear. I sat down. Colleen was crying, but silently the way she had been crying for years, I realized without anyone hearing. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her shoulders were shaking, and she did not make a sound. My daughter. Still on the wrong side of the table. Still breaking my heart without knowing it. Barbara Thornton set down her pen and looked at Nadine. "Counselor," she said, "you mentioned additional evidence in your pre-hearing filings." Nadine stood. "Yes, Miss Thornton. Evidence discovered in pre-trial proceedings." She opened her folder, and the room changed. I watched Garrett's eyes drop to the printed page in her hand, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something on his face I had never seen before. Real fear. Nadine placed a single printed page on the table. Then she placed it on the overhead display. The words appeared on the wall behind Barbara Thornton in black and white 12-point font, and I watched every person in that room read them at the same time. It was like watching a wave hit a shore. You could see the impact travel from face to face. The subject line read, "Property Acquisition Timeline." Nadine began to read aloud. Her voice was steady and clear, the voice of a woman who had waited weeks for this moment and intended to let every syllable land. From Garrett Webb to Jackson Pierce. November 15th, 2023. Subject: Property Acquisition Timeline. Quote, Year 5 completion of property tax payments on schedule for spring 2024. Recommend accelerating removal of current deed holder. Subject is elderly, no other family. Advise on timeline for filing adverse possession claim upon completion of the statutory period. End quote. She let the silence hold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The water pitcher sat untouched, sweating a ring onto the table. Nobody moved. Then Nadine turned to Jackson Pierce. The sender of this email is Garrett Webb, seated to your left. The recipient is you, Mr. Pierce. This email was sent on November 15th, 2023, 2 weeks before Mr. Prescott purchased the lottery tickets that are the subject of this hearing. Can you confirm that this is your email address? Pierce's face had gone the color of old paper. He straightened his tie. He looked at the table. This was a preliminary consultation, he said. A hypothetical exploration of legal options. Nothing more. Barbara Thornton removed her glasses. That is not what I asked you, Mr. Pierce. Is this your email address, yes or no? Yes. Removal of current deed holder, elderly, no other family. I want you to sit with those words for a moment. because I sat with them in a room full of people who were hearing them for the first time, and every one of those words was about me. I was the current deed holder. I was the elderly subject. I was the man with no other family because my wife was dead and my daughter had married the man who wrote that email. Garrett Webb had reduced my entire existence to a problem to be solved, a variable to be removed. And he had put it in writing 2 weeks before I ever walked into the Riverside General Store and spent $15 on 3 lottery tickets. The lottery did not create this. The lottery just gave Garrett a bigger budget for a plan he had already drawn. Nadine placed 6 more emails on the table, 7 total spanning October through late November 2023. She did not read them all aloud. She did not need to. The first one had done the work, but she laid them in chronological order, so Barbara could see the progression, the careful, calculated architecture of a scheme designed to strip an old man of his home while he was still living in it. Garrett had been gripping the edge of the table through all of this. His knuckles were white. His jaw was working. Jackson Pierce leaned toward him and whispered something, and Garrett pulled his arm away like the touch burned. Then Garrett stood up. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through the room like a blade across glass. And I knew the way an engineer knows when a structure is about to fail, that what was coming next would be worse than anything written in those emails. Because emails are calculated. They are written by a man who is thinking. What Garrett was about to do came from somewhere no lawyer could reach and no strategy could control. That is out of context, Garrett said. His voice was loud, too loud. That was a hypothetical. I paid the property taxes on that house for 4 years. I maintained it. I fixed the roof. I cut the grass. I did everything while he sat in his chair and did nothing. Barbara Thornton's voice was ice. Mr. Webb, sit down. No. No, you need to hear this. You need to understand what I gave up. 7 years. 7 years of my life in that house in that town, waiting for things to change. I gave up my career. I gave up Denver. I gave up everything, and for what? For a man who can't even... He stopped, but not soon enough. I spent 7 years waiting for him to die. Garrett's voice cracked on the last word. Not with sorrow, with fury. 7 years. And he just kept going. The room went silent. Not the ordinary silence of a pause between sentences. The silence that comes when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when the air itself seems to recoil. I heard Colleen make a sound I will never forget. Not a scream, not a sob, a single sharp intake of breath, the kind that comes when you finally understand something you have been refusing to see for a very long time. She covered her mouth with both hands, and she did not look at Garrett. She looked at me, 7 years waiting for me to die. That is what it had all been. The dinners, the property taxes, the patience, the slow, methodical occupation of my home. He had been waiting for me to stop breathing so he could take what was left. And when I did not die fast enough, he hired a lawyer to speed things up. Barbara Thornton wrote the words down in her notes. Slowly, deliberately, every letter. The scratch of her pen was the only sound in the room, and it went on for a long time. Then Nadine stood. Ms. Thornton, with your permission, I have one more piece of evidence. She placed her phone on the table and pressed play. The room filled with Garrett's voice recorded 3 nights earlier through the heating vent in my house. Jackson, listen to me. If the old man doesn't take the money, we make him look incompetent, confused. Focus on the pauses, the memory gaps. Make it look like age-related decline. Whatever it takes. The recording ran for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. No one moved. No one spoke. When it ended, the silence in that room was absolute. Barbara Thornton looked at Garrett. Mr. Webb, that recording establishes witness intimidation and conspiracy to commit fraud. She looked at Jackson Pierce. And Mr. Pierce, that recording includes your voice acknowledging and encouraging those actions. Then she looked up at Jackson Pierce. Mr. Pierce, do you wish to continue representing this client? Pierce sat down heavily. He did not look at Garrett. He did not look at anyone. I need to consult with my firm, he said. Barbara nodded once. This hearing is recessed until tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I advise all parties to consider carefully what has been said in this room today. She stood. She collected her notes. She left. The room emptied slowly. Pierce and his associates gathered their papers without speaking. Garrett walked out without looking back, his footsteps hard and fast down the hallway. Frank put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed, once then stepped outside to give me space. I was standing in the hallway leaning against the wall with my eyes closed, when I felt a hand close around my arm. The grip was fierce, tight enough to feel the bones, and it was shaking. I opened my eyes. Colleen was standing in front of me. Her face was wrecked. Her makeup was streaked. Her eyes were red and swollen and absolutely clear. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words. 7 years late. And I felt every single day of those 7 years collapse into the space between us like a wall coming down. I did not let go of Colleen's arm in that hallway, not right away. She held on to me, and I held on to her, and neither of us said anything more because sometimes 2 words are all a moment can carry, and anything else would have broken it. Then Frank appeared at the end of the corridor and nodded once, and we separated, and the hearing was recessed until the next morning. But the day was not over. That evening, Frank drove us to a hotel 3 blocks from the commission building. A plain place with thin walls and a lobby that smelled like carpet cleaner. Nadine went to her room to prepare for the morning session. Frank fell asleep on the couch in his room by 9. I sat in the lobby alone. I could not sleep. I could not read. I sat in a chair under a single lamp near the front desk, and I stared at the elevator doors, and I tried to understand what had happened in that hearing room. My daughter had known since fall of 2020. 3 years. She had sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinners, watched me age, watched Garrett pay the taxes on my house, like a man laying bricks in a wall he planned to own, and she had said nothing. Not because she did not care, because Garrett had told her he would leave if she spoke, and she had believed him, and she had chosen him. I should have been angry. Maybe later I would be, but sitting in that lobby at 11 at night, replaying the sound of her voice in that hearing room, all I felt was a grief so deep, it did not have edges. Not grief for what she had done, grief for what it must have cost her to do it. 3 years of silence is a prison, and my daughter had been serving her sentence in the same house where I was serving mine, and neither of us had known the other was locked up. At midnight, the elevator doors opened. Colleen walked out. She was wearing the same clothes from the hearing, wrinkled now, and her eyes were swollen, and she was holding something small in her hand. She sat down across from me. The lobby was empty. The front desk was unmanned. The only sound was the distant hum of the elevator returning to its floor. "Garrett sent me to take this from your lawyer's folder during the recess," she said. She opened her hand. "Ticket number 1. The lottery ticket I had purchased, the one Nadine had been holding as evidence. He said it was our only chance. He said if I got the ticket back, the whole case would collapse without the physical evidence. Let me tell you what a lottery ticket feels like when your daughter places it in your palm at midnight in a hotel lobby. It does not feel like $100 million. It feels like a choice. It feels like the entire weight of a person deciding after 7 years of choosing wrong who she finally is. That piece of paper cost $5 at the Riverside General Store. In that lobby under that single lamp, it was worth my daughter coming home. "I couldn't do it, Dad," Colleen said. Her voice broke on the word Dad in a way I had not heard since she was a child. "I am done. I am done being his weapon. I chose wrong for 7 years. I am choosing right now. I closed my hand around the ticket. I looked at my daughter, and I said the only thing I could think of that was true. Okay. She left. I sat in that lobby until 2 in the morning, holding a $5 piece of paper that had broken my family apart, and was now somehow putting it back together. Tuesday morning, January 19th, 10 o'clock. The hearing room was colder than the day before, or maybe that was just me. Nadine stood first. She informed Barbara Thornton that during the previous day's recess, Garrett Webb had instructed Colleen Prescott to remove ticket number 1 from Nadine's evidence folder. Colleen had refused and returned the ticket directly to the claimant. Nadine presented this as evidence of ongoing bad faith and obstruction. Colleen testified under oath. She confirmed everything: the property scheme, the 3 years of silence, the ticket theft attempt. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. But she did not look away from Barbara Thornton, and she did not look at Garrett once. Garrett slumped in his chair like a building after the last support beam has been cut. Not a dramatic collapse, just a slow, inevitable settling, the kind of failure that happens when every load-bearing lie has been removed at once. I had spent 38 years watching structures. I knew what the end looked like. This was it. Jackson Pierce sat beside him, with his briefcase already half-packed. He did not speak. He did not object. He was a man calculating the distance between himself and the exit. Barbara Thornton removed her glasses. She set them on the table. She looked at the room. "I find overwhelmingly in favor of Mr. Virgil Prescott," she said. Her voice filled the room the way a ruling should, measured and final, and carrying the weight of everything that had led to it. "The lottery ticket is a bearer instrument purchased by Mr. Prescott. The claim of voluntary gift is unsupported by evidence. I am referring this matter to the Montana Attorney General for investigation of fraud and conspiracy, and to the State Bar Association regarding Mr. Pierce's involvement. This mediation is concluded." The room exhaled. Frank, sitting behind me, put his hand on my shoulder. Nadine closed her folder and nodded once, the way she did when a structure held exactly the way she had designed it to hold. And then Colleen stood up from her chair on the other side of the table. She walked across the room. She walked past Garrett, past Pierce, past the empty water pitcher and the buzzing fluorescent lights, and she stood in front of me. "Dad," she said, "I am sorry for everything." I looked at her. I could not speak. 7 years of silence and distance and doors closing between us, and now she was here standing on my side of the table for the first time. "My daughter, my Colleen," I nodded, and that was enough. For now. Frank drove us out of the parking garage and into the January sunlight. Nadine followed in her own car. Colleen rode with us, sitting in the back seat, quiet. I sat in the front, with the window cracked, cold air on my face, watching Helena shrink in the side mirror. I reached into my coat pocket for my keys, and my fingers touched paper. Thin, slightly bent at one corner. Familiar. Ticket number 3. Still there, still forgotten. Until now. I held ticket number 3 between my fingers in Frank's truck on the drive home from Helena, creased soft at the edges from weeks in my coat pocket pressed against keys and loose change. I had bought it for Frank back in November, 1 for me, 1 for Colleen, 1 for Frank. I had forgotten about it completely. But first there was the matter of $100 million. Wednesday, January 20th. Nadine and I drove to the Montana State Lottery Commission in Helena. I carried ticket number 1 in a manila envelope, my hand on it, for the entire 3-hour drive. The commission office smelled like institutional carpet and recycled air. A woman in a navy blazer spoke in numbers the way I used to speak in pressure ratings. $52 million. The gross payout was $100 million. Federal withholding took 37%. Montana State took 6.75%. The lump sum discount shaved off the rest. The taxes alone were $48 million more than I would have earned in 3 lifetimes designing water systems. But here is the thing about a number that size: it does not feel like money. It feels like a document you sign while a woman explains withholding rates and your pen moves across the page. I signed my name 11 times. I provided my federal tax ID. I handed over the visa receipt, the authenticated ticket, and my driver's license. The woman said, "Congratulations, Mr. Prescott," and I walked out into the January cold, feeling not rich, but strange, untethered. Nadine was waiting by her car. Colleen had filed for divorce that morning. Divorce and a restraining order. Same day I claimed the ticket. Whatever had broken loose in that hearing room was still falling. She was dismantling her life with Garrett methodically, completely, with no intention of rebuilding on the same foundation. But the war wasn't over yet. Tuesday evening I was back at the house alone when I smelled it. Gasoline. Sharp, unmistakable, strong enough to burn my nostrils. I stepped onto the porch and saw a wet trail along the cedar planks I had just repaired. Someone had poured accelerant across the railing. My hands shook as I dialed 911. 247 Pinewood Drive. Someone tried to burn my house. Deputy Kendrick arrived in 11 minutes, photographed the wet boards, collected samples. "This is felony arson preparation, Virgil. You're lucky they didn't light it." By morning, security footage from a gas station 7 miles out showed Garrett purchasing a 2-gallon container at 9:14 p.m. His truck passed the Riverside Springs camera at 9:48 p.m. heading toward my property. He had been out on bail less than 24 hours. Federal charges were added: attempted arson, witness intimidation, violation of bail. Garrett was arrested again. This time, no bail. 2 days later, Jackson Pierce made his final move. He filed an emergency motion claiming Garrett possessed a duplicate visa receipt, proving joint purchase. The document looked legitimate: same date, same store, Garrett's name at the bottom. Nadine called at 6 a.m. "It's a forgery, but it's a good one. We need to prove it." Today, we drove to Billings. Nadine subpoenaed Visa's server logs and the store's point-of-sale system. By noon, we had it. Pierce's receipt showed 10:47 a.m. The store's system recorded only one $15 lottery transaction that day, mine, at 10:52 a.m. Visa, ending 4209. The timestamps didn't match. The transaction ID didn't exist in any database. The font was wrong, a Photoshop job. That afternoon, Nadine laid both receipts side by side on Barbara Thornton's desk, along with the server logs. Barbara stared at Pierce for a long time. "You submitted fabricated evidence to this commission, Mr. Pierce. I am referring this to the U.S. Attorney for Federal Document Fraud." 2 weeks later, Colorado disbarred him. His career was over. Then came the final blow. On January 25th, a Montana Lottery Commission clerk named Angela Russo walked into the FBI field office in Billings with a signed statement and a recording. Garrett had contacted her on January 12th, 6 days before the mediation, and offered her $200,000 in cash to delay my prize claim and lose the visa receipt and security footage. Angela had recorded the call. Montana law requires only one-party consent. The recording was clean, Garrett's voice. 200,000 cash, untraceable. All you have to do is make sure certain paperwork gets misplaced for a few weeks. No one gets hurt. Angela had refused. She reported it immediately to her supervisor, who escalated it to Internal Affairs, who handed it to the FBI. But Garrett had already wired $10,000 from a Colorado account to an address in Wyoming as a test payment. Wire fraud. Federal jurisdiction. FBI agent Rachel Morrison, a 15-year veteran of white-collar crime, traced the transfer, subpoenaed Garrett's financials, and built a case in a week. The U.S. attorney filed charges within days. Nadine called me that evening. He's going to federal prison, Virgil. Not maybe. He is going. I looked out the window at Catherine's Douglas fir. Good, I said. The war was over, but my body did not know it yet. My hands still clenched when I heard footsteps. My jaw still tightened when a door closed too hard. The fight had left marks the victory could not erase. Nadine called the next day. The FBI had opened a wire fraud investigation based on the interstate emails. Pierce was under state bar review. His career was finished. This is bigger than the ticket, Virgil, Nadine said. This is criminal conspiracy across state lines. I stood in my kitchen and listened to the silence of a house that was for the first time in years beginning to feel like mine again. Colleen had filed for divorce the day I claimed the ticket. By February, she entered a plea agreement accessory, after the fact, 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service and restitution to cover part of my legal fees. The judge was lenient. Colleen had cooperated, fully testified against Garrett, and shown genuine remorse. You enabled this for too long, Ms. Prescott, the judge said. But you also stopped it when it mattered. That counts for something. She called me the evening her probation was finalized. Dad, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know, I said. Now go build something worth being proud of. Then came the hardest thing I did in this entire story. I wrote a 60-day eviction notice to my daughter. I set it on the kitchen table. Colleen came downstairs that evening, saw the paper, and read it standing up. She did not sit. She did not cry. You are really doing this, she said. Yes, I said. Not to punish you, but this house needs to be mine again. And you need to figure out who you are without someone else making your decisions. Can you evict your own daughter and still call it love? I thought about 7 years of silence. 7 years of watching her shrink in doorways. And I decided yes. Sometimes love is the door you hold open while someone walks through it alone. I understand, she said, quietly, without anger. Within minutes, I heard suitcase wheels rolling across the upstairs hardwood. Colleen was not fighting the eviction. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that she needed to find out who she was without Garrett Webb telling her. I stood alone in my kitchen, truly alone for the first time in 7 years. The house was silent, and on the table next to the eviction notice, I set ticket number 3 under the overhead light, small, creased, forgotten for weeks. The next morning, I walked to Frank's house and handed him the ticket. This was always meant for you, I said. He looked at it, turned it over, and nodded once. I'll check it, he said. That was Frank. No fuss, just quiet acceptance. On the last morning, Colleen came downstairs carrying 2 canvas bags. 7 years of living in my house, and everything she owned fit in 2 bags. I do not know why that broke my heart more than anything else, but it did. She set the bags by the front door and stood in the entryway looking around, the way a person looks at a place they are seeing for the last time. Her eyes moved across the coat hook Catherine had installed in 1989. There was still a tiny pencil mark on the trim where we had measured Colleen's height every birthday until she was 12. She stared at the mark for a long time. Some memories live in the walls, whether you acknowledge them or not. Is this really goodbye? She asked. It does not have to be, I said. But it is goodbye to this version, the version where you lived in someone else's shadow. Go find the version that is just you. She stepped forward and put her arms around me. I held my daughter. She smelled like the shampoo Catherine used to buy the lavender one that always made the bathroom smell like a garden in July. I did not cry, though it was close. But I held it with the steady hands of a man who knows that some pressures are meant to be endured, not released. Some goodbyes do not need words. Colleen picked up her 2 bags, stepped off the porch, and walked to her car. She drove past Catherine's Douglas fir without looking back. The tires crunched on the frozen gravel, and then the road took her, and then the house was mine. I closed the front door. I stood in the entryway for a full minute, feeling the weight of the silence. Not the old silence, the one that had teeth. This silence was different. This silence was just a house breathing. A house with one person in it. A house that was finally, after 7 years, exactly what it was supposed to be. Let me tell you what the right kind of silence sounds like. The silence of a man standing in his own hallway, in a house he built with his own hands, with no one to perform for and no one to defend against. That silence sounds like peace, and I had not heard it in 7 years. I gave myself the month of March. I repaired the front porch on a Saturday afternoon, pulling up the warped boards and replacing them with cedar planks. Catherine had asked me to fix that porch in 2015. I was 9 years late, but as I sanded the last board and ran my hand across the grain, smooth and warm in the spring sun, I understood something. Some promises do not expire. They just wait for you to be ready. I sat on that porch the next morning with a cup of coffee and I did nothing. For 2 hours. I watched the steam rise and the light move across the yard, and Catherine's Douglas fir green now full and alive in the spring air. A bird landed on the railing. The coffee got cold. I made another cup, and it was the best morning I had had in years. April came. The money arrived in my account. $52 million in a checking account that had held $1,900 a month for the past 7 years. I did not buy anything. I did not go anywhere. I called Nadine and told her what I wanted to do first. The Catherine Prescott Memorial Scholarship. $500,000 endowed in perpetuity for engineering students from rural Montana high schools. Catherine would have laughed. She always said I would find a way to make everything about water systems and pressure calculations. But that is what engineers do. We build things that carry people from one side to the other, and this scholarship was the best bridge I ever designed. The superintendent of the Riverside Springs School District came to the house to thank me. He stood on the newly repaired porch, and his eyes were wet. "Mr. Prescott," he said, "this will change lives." I looked past him at Catherine's Douglas fir green and steady in the spring sun. "That was the idea," I said. 3 weeks later, on a cool March evening, Frank's truck pulled into the driveway. He walked up the new steps holding an envelope. "Virgil," he said, "that ticket you gave me, it won." Frank stood on my porch holding the envelope. I invited him in. He shook his head. "Just open it," he said. "Ticket number 3. The one I had bought for Frank at the Riverside General Store back in November. The one I had forgotten in my coat pocket for weeks. I had given it to him the week after Colleen left. The ticket had won $50,000. Frank had cashed it that afternoon and set up a small trust fund, $25,000 for Colleen if she ever needed it, and $25,000 split between the Riverside Springs Fire Department and the rural health clinic. "You gave me the ticket," Frank said. "I'm giving it back to the town." He also bought himself a new fishing rod and a case of the good coffee I like. He set the coffee on the porch railing and said, "I figured the ticket was your gift. The coffee is mine." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in months. Frank laughed too. Then we sat on the porch and drank coffee and did not say much of anything, which is the highest form of friendship 2 old men in Montana are capable of. That was April. Then the months opened up. Summer 2024. July. 6 months after everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, but I recognized Colleen's handwriting. She still wrote her C's the same way Catherine did, with that little curl at the top, like a wave about to break. I sat at the kitchen table and read it slowly. She was in Seattle. She had been in therapy for 5 months. She was working at a free clinic, answering phones and filing paperwork, nothing grand, but something real. She wrote that she was not asking me to forgive her. She wrote that she just wanted me to know she was trying. She was not asking for forgiveness. My daughter, who had chosen the wrong man, stayed silent for 3 years. While he planned to steal my house, was not asking me to forgive her. She was asking me to know that she was trying. And somehow that was braver than any apology could have been. Frank came by that weekend. He saw the letter on the table. "You gonna write back?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "But eventually." A week later, I sat at Catherine's walnut desk. I took out a sheet of paper and a pen. I must have written and crossed out 50 lines before I got to the 6 words that mattered. Catherine always said the truest things fit on one line. One day at a time, Dad. I sealed it in an envelope and drove to the Riverside Springs post office. I mailed it. On the way home, I stopped the truck at the edge of my property and walked across the yard to Catherine's Douglas fir. The bark was warm from the July sun, rough under my palm, alive in a way that made the whole yard hum. I pressed my hand against it, the way I used to press my hand, against Catherine's back when she could not sleep. "She's trying," I whispered. "Our girl is trying." The wind moved through the branches. That was answer enough. What is a house? I used to think it was lumber and nails and a roof that kept the rain out. A problem of engineering. Load-bearing walls, pressure-treated beams, a foundation poured level and true. Then I thought it was a battlefield. Then a prison. Then a courtroom. Now sitting on this porch in the July light, with the smell of cedar and warm coffee and the sound of nothing but wind and birds, I know what a house really is. It is the place where you decide who you are when no one is watching. And after 7 years of someone else deciding for me, I had finally made that choice for myself. I am 73 now. Catherine would have been 72. The scholarship in her name sent its first letter of award last month to a 17-year-old girl from a ranch outside of Havre who wants to design bridges. Catherine would have loved that. I just signed the check, but I signed it with steady hands and a clear mind and the full weight of a name that no one could take from me. Garrett is awaiting trial. I do not think about him often. When I do, I feel something closer to pity than anger, which tells me the worst of it has passed. The Montana sky turned gold and purple as the sun set behind the mountains. I sat on the porch. Catherine and I used to share every summer, and I watched the light change the way it has changed every evening for 33 years over this piece of land. The house was mine again, truly mine. The Douglas fir cast a long shadow across the yard. The air smelled like pine and dust and the last warmth of a July day letting go. For the first time in 7 years, I could breathe. Whatever you are facing right now, whatever door someone is trying to push you through, you have the right to stand in the frame and ask whose name is on the deed. You have the right to fight for the thing you built. You have the right to be stubborn and precise and angry and kind in whatever order the situation demands. What would you have done in my place, I would love to know. I spent 7 years being too patient, too willing to believe the people under my roof had my best interests at heart. I let a man plan to take my house while I fed him, and I let my daughter's silence pass for peace. Don't make my mistake. Trust your instincts. Don't confuse silence with safety. But here's what I learned. The right people will show up. Frank Lorraine, the pastor, the deputy, they showed up with affidavits. Nadine showed up with truth. My daughter, after 7 years, showed up with 2 words that changed everything. I believe God put me through this trial to show me what I was made of and to bring the right people when I needed them most. This Grandpa Stories lesson isn't just mine. It's a family story for anyone who's fought for what they built. These Grandpa Stories remind us that age isn't weakness, and every family story worth keeping is one you defend. When you hear Grandpa Stories like this, remember every family story carries a lesson about knowing who you are. Thank you for walking this journey with me. What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your perspective. If this resonated with you, please subscribe for more. A quick note. While inspired by real legal principles and family dynamics, Certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling. If this isn't for you, explore other videos that suit your taste. The house I built was never about lumber or nails. It was about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone rewrite your name on the deed. God bless.